Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is how to create a good advertising claim. So just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded and everyone will be sent the recording after the webinar is finished. And there's also going to be a chance for a question and answer at the end. So if you've got any questions as we go through, please feel free to put them in the question and answer box, and me and Thomas will do our best to answer them towards the end of the webinar. So how to create a good advertising claim. It's an interesting topic because we don't necessarily create advertising claims ourselves, but we obviously validate a lot of claims and we help our clients find the advertising claims that are best suited for their products to help them stand out in the market. But we also want to make sure that the claims are regulatory compliant in the markets that people are looking to sell their products. So the idea is me and Thomas are going to go through the best practice through our experience. So we'll go through our experiences a bit as well, just to show the agenda. We'll talk about how you find a relevant claim, so not just a good claim, it needs to be relevant. How you should phrase that claim to make sure that your consumers can understand it, but also makes them want to buy it. What the legal framework is for claims and claim validation. We've got two different case studies. One's about developing a claim and the other one's about validating the claims. We'll be looking at some successful and unsuccessful advertising campaigns and how we can help you. So Thomas, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Carys, and welcome to everybody else. I'm Thomas Marquardt. I'm the head of Ayton Global Research in Germany, so I'm heading the German business, and I'm a market researcher or insight person by profession and by passion. I've been working in the industry for more than 25 years. Most of the time in Unilever, that I'm sure most of you will know as a company, in different local, regional and international global roles. I set up my own consultancy after I left Unilever 8 years ago, where I actually wanted to get deeper into helping companies understand their consumer, because I've seen too many people in ivory towers who work on their own and think they know what's best for the consumer, and then sometimes fail miserably. And I believe only by getting deeper into understanding what consumers want can you be successful. And this, of course, in the end relates to claims, which means having the right positioning for your ideas and claiming the right things that consumer understand them and also want to buy things. Yeah, I think that's enough for now. Heading back to Carys.
Thank you, Thomas. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Regulatory Director at Ayton Global Research. So my specialism is in regulations to do with advertising compliance, but also anything that is to do with product testing and research in that sense. So I've worked at the company now for about 8 years, worked through lots of different job roles there, and really found that, especially for my training role, a lot of my training was to do with staff and our clients, and finding those gaps in training to do with regulations to make sure that their evidence can be used where they need to use it to advertise their products. So I'm really passionate about regulation as well. From a consumer point of view, I think that it's really important that claims are substantiated and that you have the evidence to back them, not just kind of for your own personal development for your products, but for your consumers as well, because you don't want to mislead them. So I've been around the world giving lectures on this kind of topic, but obviously this year has been very much webinar based in the UK because travel's not really happening at the moment. So always feel free to reach out to me if you want any more information for regulatory basis on advertising or consumer testing. So Thomas, would you like to kick us off with the webinar?
Okay, fine. Yeah, okay. Well, the claim. So the claims are used to market a product. So if you talk about the product, you talk about a claim, and I think everybody knows this. They appear on pack and communication. This is whenever you talk about a product, you talk about what the product can deliver and what kind of benefits does a product have. So often they describe the effects of the product. So it hydrates your skin or reduces your wrinkles. In the end, it's about helping consumers to choose the product. So they should help, should make the consumer want to buy the product and choose the product. It should help stand out in a crowded market, because we know we have lots of competition everywhere. So they should tell actually the consumer why your product is better in a relevant area than your competitor. And as I said, they should make the product look better than competition. So we've got some examples over here, which I think you can read for yourself, which are visible results in the example on your right. product improved the appearance of deep set lines and wrinkles. Some of these examples I already mentioned before. Claims that are used to entice the consumer, to just differentiate against competition, and to, in the end, to be successful in selling the products. But it starts from actually how to find a relevant claim. And this is the big area of insight that I love talking about and working about. It's about understanding your target group. When you start, ideally you start by exploring your target group. So only if you fully understand what your target group wants and needs, you are able to identify the right claim. And normally you can, apart from your own intuition and your own experience by going out and observing what people are doing and what they're not doing and using and saying, you can lots of tools of qualitative and quantitative research in order to get deeper understanding of this. I put this in there as a kind of consumer need and product performance, as a kind of circle or kind of interaction, because I think they need to stand next to each other from the very early start. If you're in marketing, if you don't work with R&D, you're probably getting lost, because you might develop something that no developer can do in the end. If you have a claim that the product cannot deliver in the end, you end up nowhere. So you need to understand what the product can do in the end. On the other hand, if you work in R&D and you come up with the most brilliant ideas that in the end no consumer wants or needs, this doesn't help you either. Just one example that comes to mind when I think of it in my early days in Unilever, when I was working in the category of cheese and food, which Unilever sold by in the meantime. Development came up to me once and said, we are brilliant. We've developed the first camembert without a rind. So we are the only ones in the world who can prepare camembert without a rind. I said, well, very interesting, but who needs it? Well, you are market research, you tell us. so which is normally not the way it works. In the end, of course, business wanted me to follow up, so we followed up, and we discovered, not surprisingly, that there are very few people in the world who want to come and wear without a rind, and this actually was dead on arrival, this concept. So all I'm saying is here, you need to be very close to at the early stage in marketing and development to develop the right claims. R&D can also give very relevant stimulus, because often marketing doesn't even know what the product can do and what could be interesting claims. So you can't really ask the right questions, because we also know consumers are not very inventive and creative. You need to stimulate responses to really go deep. So this is in a way an art of cooperation to get the right insights. You can also ask your customers. It's a very simple way to do a customer survey about their experiences with the product, or let them compare with competition to understand where you perform and how you perform. And finally, very simple, which I assume you all do, is check your competitors and check successes and failures. Just see what's been published. Failures is often a bit more difficult, because nobody really wants to talk about their failures, so they are often not so clearly published. But anyway, use all kinds of sources out there in the market. Go out and really understand the needs to develop a relevant claim. That's why I say a relevant claim. Okay.
That's great. I think I agree with the checking the failures as well. I'll touch on the regulations a bit later, but I always say to people, if they've got a claim that's quite new or quite risky, have a look at the advertising authorities and see if there's been any cases published where things have been upheld about a complaint. You see it a lot, especially a lot of my clients have had things like hair growth products, but there's been a lot of cases upheld about them because they can be medical conditions. So I think it's a really good way, not just in terms of what's the advertising kind of benefit, but also what's compliant as well.
And building on that, I think creating an effective claim is a multifunctional task. In the end, you need to have lots of functions involved. Insights, as I said, this is where the whole thing starts. This is where I like to start from. What's in it for the consumers, what the consumers want and need. R&D, of course, the product needs to deliver on this, otherwise it won't go anywhere. Marketing, of course, needs also think about the brand and brand strategy. Is it on brand strategy? Does it support the brand or not? Sales, can it be activated? The other day I read an interesting article about, I think it was in the US, where a bag company had found out that many cheap competitors, when people go out shopping, they buy 2 bags or use 2 bags just to make it stable. Their bag was more stable, so they happily promoted that their bag is more stable and you need less of others. And they realized that of course, their customers, the trade, retail, didn't really want these bags because they sold less in the end. So this is actually also an area to look at what is happening in trade. And of course, and finally, is it legally supported, validated? Where Carys and her expertise comes into the game. Strong claims need to perform across all functions. If all of this is ticked off, then you can have a strong claim.
Great. And as I said, I'll touch on this. So how are ads then regulated? So it's really important to think about your claims and make sure they're going to market your product properly. But it's also really important to make sure that those claims are going to be compliant when you're advertising your product. So I just want to touch on how ads are regulated. So it's not the same for every single country, but for most countries worldwide, it's all done through ad self-regulation. So you get self-regulatory organizations that are advertising authorities, and it's basically a way for the industry to regulate itself, to make sure that advertisements are legal, decent, honest, and truthful. It's always the words that you need to ring true in your head when you're thinking about advertising your product. So the authorities basically work on a complaints basis. So it'll either be a consumer or a competitor that may complain about your product if it's got claims on there that they think are unsubstantiated or just not true about your product. And then basically they'll complain to the authorities, who will then approach you for your evidence and then decide whether the complaint is upheld or not. If the complaint is upheld, it basically usually means you just need to remove the advert in its form. That can be really easy if it's online because you can just take the advert off. But if it was like on your product packaging or something like that, that could be a whole product recall to make sure that your adverts aren't out there. So it's really important to be aware, to make sure that your adverts are not going to be going against any authority's code of conduct before it's placed on the market. So there's 3 parts of the industry that basically, if you're a part of that, you need to be aware of the advertising authority's code of conduct. There's the advertisers who pay for its advertising, the advertising agencies responsible for its form and content, and the media that carry it. So if you fall into any of those 3 parts of the industry, you really need to be aware of what the advertising authorities are saying in the country that you're selling your product. It's really important to think, if you're a global brand as well, it's not about the country that you've made the product, it is the country that your advert is appearing. Something we've been talking about a lot with e-commerce, especially during these times where people are selling more online. You really need to be aware that if your adverts are being shown in countries that you maybe not necessarily have thought of as yourself as that kind of global brand, if your products are being sold there and people are seeing your adverts in that country, you need to be really aware of the advertising code of conduct. Generally, it's the same kind of ideas behind every code of conduct, and generally, as long as you've got evidence behind your claims, you're going to be pretty safe. So that's the main thing. So I know there's certain countries that aren't so hard on having evidence behind your claims, or got much looser laws about and regulations about it. But that's why, if you're kind of selling globally, you really need to be aware of what's going on. So just some kind of guidance pages here to where you can find those local authorities. You've got the ICC, which is the International Chamber of Commerce. Now they've set a self-regulatory framework that countries can adopt, and there's 52 countries that have currently adopted that. So they're a really good place to look because you can see who has adopted that framework, and it's kind of a good starting point because they're kind of the big players, and when you think about which countries have adopted it, it's most of the big players. There's also ICAS, which is the International Council of Ad Self-Regulation. That was set up by the European Advertising Standards Alliance. So obviously it's got all of the EU countries in it, but it's also global. So there's other countries that are involved in that as well. And again, they all share the same kind of code of conduct, the same news. They promote news about all the different advertising regulations. So it's a really good resource to look at if you're not sure. There are other kind of federal agencies as well. So obviously in the USA, you've got the FTC, in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, you've got the National Media Council. So there's federal things you need to be aware of as well. But generally, most countries are working on ad self-regulation. So talking about cosmetic claims in particular, so as said, this is always available for any kind of industry. If you're from a different kind of industry, don't worry, it will still be a really helpful webinar. But cosmetics really is where we see the most claims, and I know it's where a lot of you are going to have a background in, where you're going to be working in currently. So it's something we talk about a lot because you don't seem to tend to see as many claims in other industries. Cosmetics is very a contested market, and people use it so they can get benefits from it. So if you don't have claims on your cosmetics, you really should, because people need to know why they want to purchase your product. So really the kind of EU cosmetic claim definition is a really good one, well, if you're in the EU, but it also does reflect a lot of different countries. Please be aware that if you are selling globally again, that some products could be a cosmetic in the EU, but they could be something else elsewhere. So obviously things like sunscreen is a good example. That's a cosmetic in the EU, but in the United States, it is an OTC. So there's different claims you need to make and different processes for registering a product. So obviously a cosmetic claim is a really good way to think about from the EU definition, but do look in the country that you're selling your product, if you know what I mean. So basically the EU definition is that a cosmetic claim is the benefits delivered by the product, and they should be consistent with reasonable consumer expectations. So make sure, again, when you have evidence, it's a really good way of kind of making sure that you've got reasonable consumer expectations, and certainly with consumer research that we do, because it's on a consumer's perception. So they'll use the product and they'll say subjectively if that product can deliver those benefits. You also need to think about basically whether it's appropriate with the overall presentation of the advertising as well. So basically just make sure that your claims are really clear to your consumer, and that they're appropriate for the type of product that it is. Don't kind of go off-piste when you're deciding your claims for your product. If it's a moisturizer, make sure they're real moisturizing benefits that are kind of to do with it. Don't kind of go into something else that hasn't got anything to do with the product. And again, that really relates to what Thomas was saying earlier about when you're kind of creating your claim and making sure it's appropriate and relevant to your product. And all fits in together quite nicely. So there's also the EU cosmetics regulation. Again, this I think really applies globally. So they've highlighted the 6 common criteria for cosmetic claims. I think this is a really helpful sort of thing to keep in your mind, no matter where you're selling your product, because it really will be outlined in any kind of regulation. So to break them down, you've got legal compliance. So your product obviously must be compliant legally when the country you're selling your product, but you also can't use it as a tool to sell your product. I had one the other day, I need to remember this example. Oh, it was to do with people asking if we can get an accreditation to say that their claims have been substantiated if they use our service. So this is a really interesting one because technically all claims should be substantiated. So if we were to say on your kind of product label, our product claims have been validated, it could fit under the legal compliance where, you know, all claims should be validated. So it's kind of going against your competition, giving them a hint that maybe their claims haven't been validated, even though it could be true. And as we know, there can be a wild west out there when it comes to claims and some people not having their claims validated. It's also truthfulness. So if you had aloe vera in your product, you couldn't sort of say it, or say you did have aloe vera in your product and you didn't have it in there, or you didn't have it at an active level. It needs to be really truthful to what is actually in the product. You must have evidential support. Of course, it's something we've talked about a lot and something we'll continue to talk about during this webinar. It needs to be honest. So if you do have evidential support, and for example, you had 98% of women, of 50 women agreed that the product was hydrating, and you put into your advertising to make it sound better that 98% of 100 women had agreed with it, that wouldn't be honest. So you simply can't say that. It needs to be fair. So this is a really important one, especially for things like comparison claims. So for example, if you were to say if you were to test your product against another product, if yours was an antiperspirant and you tested it against a deodorant which didn't have antiperspirant properties, and you said that it was better at kind of helping eliminate odors or stopping people's sweat, you wouldn't be able to say that because it's not fair on the product that you've tested it against. It has to match quite equally in benefits. And your consumers need to be able to make an informed decision. So quite clearly, any claims that you have on there should be worded in a way that the consumers can understand it. They know what benefits they're going to get from the product, and they can make an informed decision to purchase your product. There's also different types of claims that I want to touch on. And there's different kinds of evidence that you need to support each one. So things like sensory claims and product aesthetic claims, they're all to do with things like the fragrance, the look, the feel of the product. I like the way the product looks. I like the fragrance of the product, those kinds of claims. There's performance claims. It's really straightforward. It's efficacy of the product. Does it do what it's supposed to do? If it's an antiperspirant, does it stop people, leave people feeling dry for longer? Ingredient claims, mentioned it earlier, it could be something like contains soothing aloe vera. Combination claims, this is where you have, usually with things like shampoo and conditioner, and you'll say for best results, use this shampoo with this conditioner, that kind of claim. That obviously needs to have been tested together. You can't just say that unless you've got some kind of evidence to say that is how people get the best results. Comparison claims, again, really straightforward. It could be against a competitor. It's something we see quite a lot in the States. Or it could be against one of your own formulations. It's something we see with a label, it might say new and improved formula. We need to have a comparison there to make sure that it actually is a better received formula. Subjective claims. Overall, this is exactly what we do with consumer research, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It's basically self-assessed claims. Does this person's own opinion, do they agree with that kind of claim? Is it something that is subjective to them, something that is their own perception? And objective claims is very much your clinical side of research. So measurements, 24-hour hydration, 30% reduction in wrinkles. They're things that cannot be someone's opinion. It's an instrumental study, and it's something that is purely scientific. So back to Thomas.
How to phrase a claim. Just a few thoughts on how to best put a phrase in words, or a claim in words. And the first thing that I always say is use consumer language. And as obvious as this may seem, often it's forgotten, because we all, if we work in our industry, we get so close to our topics that often we don't even realize anymore that many words we are using are not the words that actually normal consumers understand, use. So I always, in a way, recommend, if you've got a good claim, maybe ask your mother or someone else in the street what he or she thinks about it, because if you're in your office environment together with people who think about the same things, you often forget how normal people would call it. I put this example on the right side, which was a claim where let's say X% of subjects agree skin feels more hydrated, etc. It's not subjects, it's people. So I think nobody really wants to be talked about as subjects. So if you publish this, maybe better to say actually of people who've tested it or something like this, to make sure it's really consumer language, because it in a way might be off-putting, or people don't understand it if you get too technical. The second one is also obvious one, keep it short and simple. Some people say not more than 3 to 6 words. I wouldn't argue about the real number of words, but anyway, try to keep it short, because people don't want to read long sentences and don't understand long and complicated sentences. Be clear, in a way it relates to what we had before, no implicit messages. You might say this contains aloe vera because everybody knows what aloe vera does. Yeah, maybe, but I'm not sure everybody does it. And you don't want people to think when they read your claim that you want them to immediately understand and jump to the conclusion. So if aloe is skin soothing and you want to claim it, put it on there to make it sure that people don't have to think while they read the claim, but immediately understand what the whole thing is about. And then the last one, which I think is for everyone in the industry, is the most difficult one. Focus on one key message, or maybe 2 key messages, but don't make it a shopping list, because in the end, like you see on the right one, there are so many claims. Which is the one that in the end will stick? It's like if you're a goalkeeper, if one you might hold one ball, but if you've got 10 balls going at you at the same time, you won't catch any of them, and you won't get any of them, and you won't get the meaning. So try at least to focus and to be as clear as possible on the key messages, because this is in the end what also will stick in the consumer's mind. Let the consumer read these lists on the right hand side and ask him or her afterwards what she will remember. I'm not sure actually how much of this will really stick. So this is actually a big challenge, but I think less is often more. So try to focus.
Great. And then that ties in really nicely to questionnaire design. So obviously, to make a good claim, you need to have a really good questionnaire that will support your claim so you can use your evidence. So I've put together kind of a couple of slides about good questionnaire design and poor questionnaire design. Obviously, it's not going to be the kind of most specific thing because every questionnaire is different. It depends on your product, it depends on your claims, if it's even an overall market research survey or just finding out about the claims. But it's some really good things to think about if you're doing questionnaire design. I have also put a sentence there to say that we offer questionnaire design as well. So don't feel like we're going to sort of say, well, go ahead and make your own questionnaire. I've given you the advice you need. But it's just really good things to think about. So always keep the answer groups consistent. This is really important, not just to make sure that the participants that are in the questionnaire are able to answer your questions, but it's really important when you're reviewing your data. If you've got very different answer groups, it can be very difficult to sort of measure the different product attributes against each other. This is also a case from study to study. So if you've already done a consumer study and you say had a 1 to 9 scale with strongly disagree to strongly agree, and then you thought, actually, I want to change it to a 1 to 4 scale with strongly disagree to strongly agree and not have a neutral response in the middle, it's going to be really hard to compare those two studies. And again, we always sort of advise people to use a questionnaire design answer groups that we commonly use as well. Because if we were to say test a face cream of yours and the product performed really badly, while we couldn't share the data of our other product tests that we've done, we would be able to say if it was comparative to other face creams that we've done and whether you should reformulate or whether you should continue to kind of push that product. So it's really important to keep things consistent. Always have appropriate answer groups. You need to make sure that your participants can answer your question. It's quite straightforward. Questions should also be appropriate. So obviously focus on what you're actually trying to research. Don't go kind of off-piste again. The question should always be clear, be really straightforward. Generally for claims, we word them as a statement and people can agree or disagree with them. It makes things really, really easy. And we try and keep it sort of as one really clear claim per question. Again, as Thomas was saying earlier, it's better to do it that way anyway. You don't want to claim that sort of says, my skin felt soft and smooth and silky and all of this. Keep it really, really succinct. My skin felt soft. People can easily agree or disagree with that. It should be in present tense. So again, where we can kind of lift sort of claims out really easily if they're a statement, my skin is soft is really, really clear and people can agree or disagree with it. If you say my skin was soft, it's not incredibly clear whether you mean before or after using the product, although we know that what we mean. Free text answers are really great to have as well. So I always encourage my clients to have at least one free text answer at the end of their study. My example for this one was also really important. Was a serum that we tested that was rated really, really poorly. We didn't understand why the product wasn't performing. But there's a free text at the sort of end of the questionnaire to say if they've got any other comments about this product. And people said they really didn't like the fragrance. Now this meant that they knew the rest of the product would probably had performed pretty well, but people didn't like applying it so much they rated it really poorly. We changed the fragrance of the product, tested it again, and every other attribute passed and was kind of successful in their claims. So it really shows how important that free text was because they could have had no idea where to go with the product after it failing on the product claims. And the wording should always match the claim. So as I said, if your claim is soft skin, make sure it matches and says it's soft. Don't use other wording and then change the wording for your claim because it won't be compliant.
If I may add something to the questionnaire design, because I always felt like designing a question actually is an art, and I think it is too often underestimated because everybody can phrase questions and everybody can put down questions, and I've seen too many people who believe you don't need market researchers for making a questionnaire. Maybe you don't, but one thing that's very often forgotten is that every question creates a bias for the next question. So the order of question is the most difficult part when you design a questionnaire, because you create a continuous, constant bias. And everything you have asked, if so, you should ask the most important thing at the beginning, because the people are not unbiased. As soon as you've asked your first question, people already have a bias. So if you're, for instance, your early development stages, ask what people like and don't like about a product at the very beginning. Because if once you've asked the first question about does your product hydrate well your skin, you can be very, very sure that hydration will come up very often in the likes and dislikes as a key issue that people now think of. So that's why I think the order of question is difficult, because often you've got conflicting targets in terms of where you want unbiased answers, and then you need to think twice and very careful and discuss very careful in which order do you put the questions to make sure that the bias is as a minimum.
That's so true. And I think a questionnaire is always like a story as well. You want to make sure it flows really nicely,
Yeah.
like so you don't get those weird biases. And actually it leads on really nicely to, these are kind of the poor questionnaire design ideas taken straight from the MRS, because they know what they're talking about when it comes to poor questionnaire design. Anything can make a poor questionnaire, but they've got some really good examples here. But actually repetitive questioning really links into that as well. And like you said, especially when it comes to key claims and setting that bias, I see it a lot where we might have a 6-week study, and the overall benefit people want to achieve with the product is anti-aging benefits, something like fine lines and wrinkles. But instead of asking it at the end of the study, they know that the product will take about 6 weeks to sort of really see a difference in fine lines and wrinkles, but they'll start asking it every week throughout the study. And the problem is the bias has been set then, because people haven't seen any improvement. They're kind of bored of answering that same question every week, and you end up with an issue. So it's really important to make sure that, as Thomas said, that think about the bias overall, and only ask questions if they need to be asked, when they need to be asked. So repetitive questioning is certainly something there. And you see it within one questionnaire section as well, where people sort of ask the same kind of claim twice, sort of more than once, trying to make sure they get the claim with different wording. Consumers can really see through this. And again, that bias will set in and they'll kind of go, well, I've already answered that question, and start getting a bit annoyed. So the other kind of things that can impact a questionnaire negatively: excessively lengthy questionnaires. So again, as Thomas mentioned earlier, kind of have a key message that you're looking for with your claims, and this really helps remove that excessively lengthy questionnaire as well. If you've got sort of 40 claims about your product you want to ask, obviously that's going to be 40 questions and the consumers can get pretty bored. Whereas if you're really clear from the beginning what your claims are, you won't have that long a questionnaire, because you know what you want to find out and you can target it really specifically.
And I think what I said before is actually put yourself in the shoes of someone who's being asked these questions. Maybe indeed, Meg, as I said before, maybe ask your mother. but I've seen too lengthy questions there, because people want to know everything. But what you forget is actually that you're boring your consumers out of hell. And in the end, if you are bored, they will answer. Either they might stop, or they might continue to answer but not really think about the answers, and you get invalid or not useful responses. So avoid it. I just had an example the other day where someone wanted to understand how you listen to the radio, and they had, I think, 20 radio stations across each hour of the day and across each days of the week, and huge metrics of asking people when they were listening to what kind of music, at what kind of hour, and what kind of day, with what kind of radio station. Nobody can answer this. This takes for ages, and I think the outcome is completely useless. So by just focusing on the most important questions, in the end, you will learn much more.
Absolutely. So other points as well, we've got insufficient opportunity for respondents to have their say. So this often kind of comes into play when we talk about having a neutral option. So like I said, we might have a 1 to 9 scale on our questionnaires, and the 5 is obviously neutral. The reason that is because we want to make sure that consumers have got every opportunity for them to have their say. And that might be that they don't know. They're not sure whether they agree or disagree. It doesn't always have to be in there, but it's just a really safe way of doing questionnaire design. It's also the case if you were looking at, I don't know, something like what brand of foundation people use, and you only had 3 brands on there because that's all you cared about. Well, if they haven't used those 3 brands, they can't answer the question. And also excessive classification section. Now, this is something that's been really cracked down on anyway with the GDPR, because we don't want to get too much information, too much data from participants that's unnecessary. But I still see it for things like face creams, and people want to know if they have a degree or if they, what kind of, they're a white collar worker. While it's important to target your consumer, I think it can be unnecessary at the point when you've already sent out the product. So I think if you know what your consumer is and you want to find out from that consumer what their product opinions are, that's great. But when it comes to the point of already testing the product, I don't think you need to excessively classify your consumers. It can be useful and it cannot be useful, but don't kind of go too in depth and get information that you don't actually need for your product test. So once we've got our questionnaire and everything like that, we'll want to make sure we can conduct a study to get our evidence. So obviously me and Thomas conduct consumer research, and I just want to give you an overview of that if you're quite new to using consumer research or if you haven't kind of looked into it too much. So we specialize in in-use tests. So we'll send products to consumers to test at home, and they'll review it from their perception and answer online questionnaires for their opinion. So as I said, subjective kind of claims that we're looking at. It's a really good way of getting reflection of the actual use of the product, actual conditions of the product in use. So obviously this can be a really good way to test things like your usage instructions as well, because whatever usage instructions you're going to have on your product, that is what this consumer will be following, and they'll be using the product in that way. Again, when we're looking at research as a whole, this can even be something that you might want to reflect on. We had it with a product in China where the usage instructions weren't very clear, and actually the consumers rated the product really poorly because they actually weren't sure even how to use the product. They were kind of guessing, it wasn't very clear, and that's what was going to be on the product packaging. So thank God they'd done a consumer test, they found that out, and they were able to change that before the product went to market. It's also good for things like undesirable event reporting. Obviously safety tests and things like that will give you your undesirable data. But actually when you are putting that out to more people, so usually around 100 people in a consumer test, you may find that there's more undesirable events reported. Hopefully nothing serious, but it's really helpful for you to know before your product goes into market again.
Generally, just one remark on this. Whenever people ask me how to test things, I always say that the leading guideline anyway is always test as close as possible to the consumer's reality. If you just keep this in mind, this will already give you a lot of directions and say this is probably better to have people tested in their homes than inviting them to a hall and to create all kind of artificial environments to test products. Just try to replicate as much as possible what people would really do with the product, and then you get the best test results.
Absolutely. And what we were saying earlier about ad self-regulation and how usually it's the consumers that complain about the product. If you are testing it on, your actual consumers as close to the consumer as possible, it's unlikely that people will get other kind of effects when they're using it at home, because that's exactly how the product's been tested. So that data is really valid. So it's really important to get that kind of that data behind your claims. You can have people just test the efficacy of a product, or they might compare it as well. And you may need additional evidence for claims. So very often we might work with a clinical lab. So if they had, say, 10 claims on a product, there might be one that needs instrumental testing, but the rest of them can all be backed up by consumer research. So it's really important not to think of kind of clinical testing as something that's, sort of not complementary to consumer testing. They very much are. Other kind of reasons to use consumer research as well, because obviously we're talking about claims today, but I think it's a really good point to think about what other marketing benefits you can get from consumer research. So obviously you want to substantiate your advertising claims, testing your product's efficacy, actually in reflecting the conditions of use. Obviously making sure that we're testing in the markets that you're selling your product. So I always use the example of long-lasting foundation. If you would test that into the UK, you might have sort of people agree that it's long lasting, they might have drier skin types, it might be a colder climate. But if you were then to sell the product in Malaysia, that claim would not be necessarily substantiated, because the people over there, the consumers over there, might find that actually in a hotter, more humid climate, the foundation hasn't been long lasting. So always make sure that you're looking at the product acceptability in the location that you're looking to sell it, but also to make sure that those advertising claims are still compliant. You can target your specific consumer groups, as I mentioned earlier. So this is really important as well, and something that you can't necessarily do with clinical testing, because obviously you're looking at people going to a lab, whereas if you're looking at a consumer test, say your two biggest markets were UK and Germany, Thomas and I can do a consumer test in both those locations on a nationally demographic sample, on the exact participants that you're going to purchase your product, and see if they are actually going to accept your product as well. There's some examples there of the kind of claims that you can use. So it could be percentage claims, things like 88% of people agree it moisturizes the skin, but also might want to break it down to things like 9 out of 10 women to make it a bit more, I don't know, a bit more appealing in the advertising, as long as you've got the statistics to back it up. You can also use things like testimonials. I think that's a really important thing. Before and after photos. There's lots of other marketing things you can get from consumer research to help support your advertising claims. So some examples, so it's always really good to hear about it, but examples is obviously the best way to think about how you can use your data. So obviously these are online, so this is on these products websites. I've literally gone on there and just screenshotted from the website, so you can see exactly how they're presenting their results, really helping them sell those products. So you've got Drunk Elephant with some consumer testing results there. Again, really succinct claims that are very clear. Same with Elemis, and they've put how many people have tested the product and how long for. And the same with Charlotte Tilbury as well. They've put how many people have tested the product and how long for, and that's really important to include. And you can see there's some fantastic results on all three of those products. So it's really appealing to a consumer to have that readily available when they're looking for a product to purchase. Same as social media. So I've picked a couple of brands here that have use their consumer research data and put it on their social media as well. So one's Philip Kingsley, and you can see they've kind of got a big description of the product, but they've also put in the picture that 80% of users agreed that their hair felt nourished after use. And then Bulldog have done the opposite thing, where they've got the picture of the product, and then when you look in the description, it says, in our consumer test, over 70% of users felt that the product left the beard feeling soft, soothed, conditioned, less itchy, and the skin feeling nourished. So what they've done there is they've scored over 70% on all of those claims, and then been able to say that in one kind of speech on their social media there. It's another great way of showing the product. There's advertising claims on shopping channels as well. So QVC is obviously the real kind of culprit for seeing kind of claims put on there. I've got a clip that I can share as well. If you bear with me, it's always a technical, interesting thing when I'm trying to share the screen. Okay, 2 seconds. Here we are. Okay, let me make sure it's on the right part. Sorry, I had it open on the right part earlier and it skipped classically. Here we go. So share the new screen.
1,000 words. Yeah. Can I show you? So here's the results, and then I want to show you the before and afters. So in a consumer study, after 2 weeks, every single woman said that the texture of their skin was smoother.
That's
every
incredible.
Single woman.
You can get every woman to agree on where we want to go for dinner.
I know.
You know, or what movie we want to see, right? You got to do like Duck, Duck, Goose, or I don't know. You have to do Rochambeau, Paper, Scissors, Rock. Sorry. 95%
said it's balanced and not oily. But again, whether you have oily skin or dry skin or combo skin, this is going to be great. After 4 weeks, every single woman said that their skin had a healthy glow and that the appearance of their skin was brighter. That's what exfoliation does for you. 95% said that the skin tone was more even, and 90% said that their skin felt hydrated, balanced, supple.
So the press is talking about this. Allure.com, popsugar.com, the
I'll take that. Let me share the presentation again. So yeah, you can see they're fantastic at kind of really talking about claims on QVC.
What's missing was the number of people who've responded.
Pardon?
What's missing is the number of people in this study.
It is. So yes, I'm sure they have to show that somewhere in the information on QVC. But they have just showed the results. They haven't actually showed the number of people it was performed on, which is interesting. But there are really clear guidelines for QVC as well. So if you are interested in going to shopping channels, you do need your claim substantiated. And also there's the same for other shopping channels as well. But like I said, QVC is kind of the classic one for it. So I've listed those there, but you can see this really readily on their website. But yeah, so it's a fantastic way of getting your claims out there. Because everything they talk about needs to be substantiated, not just the claims that they kind of bring up. They're really well trained on shopping channels like that. So everything that they say about that product has to be verified evidence as well. We also need to talk about labels and packaging. I touched on this earlier. People often think that consumer research can't be used to substantiate claims on labels and packaging, which isn't true. It absolutely can be. But as with any claim, you need to make sure it's very clear that it's a self-assessed claim. And it can't be kind of worded in a way that's very scientific. It makes it seem like it's a clinical claim. But people also thought that labels and packaging weren't necessarily included as an advert, if you know what I mean. But this has come from ICAS, which I mentioned earlier, and they've basically said that it's really important to note that advertising authorities will be looking at claims on labels as a type of advertising, so they can also be kind of complained about, and those cases can be upheld. So Thomas, over to you for our first case study, please.
Yeah, okay, that's my first case study, which is a different industry. This was a food company, but still I found a very interesting one that I would love to share with you. The issue was a bit funny in a way. A manufacturer was working on an innovative cooking product that they had spent quite some time in innovating and working on. But realized after a while that marketing and product development obviously were not so close, because the development has turned into a direction that was more and more away from the original idea, even though everybody believed they had a wonderful product. So they had a wonderful product that seems to have potential, but it didn't really know what the product was, how it was being used, what the benefits were, how they should claim it, how they should sell it, how they should position it. And this was all very open. A bit of a funny situation, so a product without a concept. So they came to us and said, actually, okay, what can we do? How can we find out what's the best way to describe this product, and in the end find the right position, find the right claims that we can sell it in the market. So we wanted to deliver in-depth understanding of the product performance and benefits. And what we did then, I don't know if I can move on, no. Yeah, so we did a kind of two-step online survey with product experience. So we had it in Germany, obviously, and we selected 60 respondents, which means women in this case, who like to cook, who could cook, like to try out new recipes, are very experimental and open and interested in cooking and new ideas and development, and also in a somehow comfortable economic situation because the product didn't come extremely cheap. And we sent them the product with a very short generic description of the product can do, and say, now please take the product and make something with it or out of it. So they used the product. They had, I think, about a week to cook with the product, and they were supposed to give, first of all, very generic feedback. So we asked them to take pictures of what they did, write recipes of how they prepared dishes with these products, and tell us what they really liked about the product and what they didn't like about the product. So a very, very open approach to understanding how people who are just confronted with a product without actually any kind of usage instructions, how they use it and how the product performed in the end. So when we got back the results, I can't go into too much into detail because this was, of course, was confidential. But you see over here on the right-hand side, you see some of the pictures that people had sent to us and what they had prepared with this product. So some very nice pictures. Some dishes more appealing than others, but it showed a huge variety of what people had done with it, and this came together with very detailed description also of how they had used the product and how they prepared the dishes, and as I said, how the product has performed. And on top of that, of course, we also asked them, well, did you like the product? Would you like to use more? Would you like to use more of this product in the future? And we saw that this is a very, very positive response. So 38 out of these 48 people who had responded in the end would definitely, or probably definitely use it again. So we felt we were definitely on the right track with the product. This is a product that performs and is worth pursuing. Then we went back to them in step 2, which anyway I think something that we are not doing often enough, because the good thing is we know our respondents, we know who has told us what and who has responded, so we can go back to the same respondents and ask follow-up questions. And this is what we did over here. We got a lot of feedback which we implemented and built into a very detailed follow-up questionnaire, where we first of all, had potential product categories because the category was not quite clear. But now we had some hypotheses on what this could be. We asked them specifically how they would use it, also generally purchase intent and price. But most importantly, in this context, we had 26 different claims that we could in the end use to position the product and to communicate the advantages of the product about. So as I said, this was answered by the same respondent as before because they knew how the product performed and what they did with the product. So they could also answer the question about which of these claims actually resonates with you or not. So when we got this feedback from this in-depth study, we made a workshop together with a client where we presented the results and discussed with them and had a full day of analysis and discussions and building and etc. And in the end, we had jointly a fairly good understanding of how the product performs, what the strengths were, what the benefits were, which allowed us to build 4 different positioning options in full concepts with how you could name the product, what kind of claims you could use, how the packaging would look like, where you put it on the shelf, which category it would be in, etc. Which then the client could take home and work from. We even suggested a kind of concept test afterwards, which didn't materialize with us for whatever kind of internal reasons the client had at that time. This could have been the next phase of consumer research, testing the concepts to understand which are the most relevant ones. But at any rate, just going and starting very freshly from very depth and very deep and very close to the consumer and having them work with a product helped us develop strong concepts and claims that the client could work with.
Great. And then basically once those claims are kind of put into place, my case study very much goes down the side of then how do you validate it, making sure that those claims are going to be compliant. So my example is curl shine oil, which comes from a contract manufacturer based in Europe. And basically, they wanted to make sure their claims are going to be compliant in their relevant markets and all advertising platforms. But mainly the claim they were looking to substantiate is that it was suitable for all curl types. So this is something that's been talked about a lot recently, certainly again from a consumer point of view, where you kind of calculate what curl type you are from 2A right through to 4C. And make sure that you get the right products that are suitable for you. So we want to make sure with this one it's suitable for all of those different curl types. Bringing it back to the legislation. So obviously I talked earlier about the different advertising authorities and their code of conduct. So this is from the EASA, which is the European Advertising Standards Alliance. And this is literally lifted from their code of conduct to sort of put into context why it's really important to have evidence. So basically they say that advertisers need to have documentary evidence to substantiate their claims. And then they need to have it basically readily available if it's ever requested by the regulatory organization, and it should be without delay. So this is the important thing I always talk about. A lot of people will kind of get their claims validated in hindsight, but it's really important to build into your new product development, not just from what Thomas is saying, to make sure that you're targeting your marketing completely correctly, but also so you don't have to kind of go back and try and get that evidence at a later point if you don't already have it. Certainly, I know there's certain countries, for example, the UAE, where I think there's something like a 2-week deadline to provide evidence. Well, if you've got 4 weeks claims on there, you're not going to be able to get that evidence in time at all. So it's really important. So back to the study in particular. The study protocol was really, really simple because we were really focused on the curl types. So we conducted it in the UK. This is where their main market was. We also knew that for the other markets, it was still going to be substantiated because the efficacy of the product would still perform the same. It's a 14-day study. It was easy. It was a hair oil. It didn't need to be too long. We wanted female and male on the study, and most importantly, we needed 12% of every single curl type. So 2A, 2B, 2C, 3A to 3C, and 4A to 4C. It had to be national around the UK to make sure it was reliable, but also to make sure, as I said earlier, to be able to get these kinds of hair types in this kind of in this kind of amount of people, this is where consumer research is really important, because it's hard in clinical where people have to go to a lab to make sure you've got every single type of hair type on there. So what were the results? So this is taken from our report. This is the summary part. So as well as the questionnaire breakdown that you get, which Thomas showed in his case study, you also get a summary table, which basically says the number of people and the percentage of people that agree with each claim or disagree with it. And as I said earlier, we kind of have every question there and we see how many people have agreed with it. So to make it really clear, did you love this hair oil? If you go across to column 4, you can see that 70% of people agreed that they did love the hair oil. And we can do that throughout the rest of the claims as well. So 82% of people agreed that it helped control frizz, 80% of people agreed that the hair feels smooth, and 80% of people agreed that it has amazing shine and gloss. So not only are these really important claims for things like a hair oil when you're looking at curly hair types, it's what I was saying about subjective claims earlier. So amazing shine and gloss, that's not really a measurable thing. Amazing isn't something that's measurable, but it's a fantastic marketing word, and it's something you can only get through consumer research. So as you can see, this is some fantastic evidence that this client can now use to put into their marketing. There's also the other side, so the not so successful claims and how they've been removed. So these are examples of removed adverts that I've found, and I just want to briefly touch on the kind of basically what can kind of catch you out, I guess. So these were all kind of US-based claims. The first one was Maybelline, that basically had a 14-hour stay lipstick. This was basically misleading and inaccurate. They didn't have any evidence behind this claim. And actually what's really, really scary in the USA is that you can get sued if you say sort of misleading claims. So as I said earlier, a lot of self-regulatory organizations will ask you to remove your ad. When you're looking at the states, it goes down a federal line and you can find yourself with a very big lawsuit. And we do see this a lot in the news. So really make sure you have those evidence to substantiate those claims. A really interesting one for Proactive is that this was an advert that was shown in the UK, but it was for the formula that was American, which has got a different formula for it, basically. So again, it's a misleading ad because and this is where I was saying you have to think about where your adverts are actually being shown, because it's a completely different formula. Therefore, those are not the benefits that someone can necessarily expect to receive in the UK. Because it's the US version. A really interesting one as well was that Estee Lauder got into a bit of hot water for their false advertising revelations. Basically, they had their internal testing house and their staff had been making up results about the product. So it was very misleading. And a really important reason why it's good to use an independent testing house like us, because there's going to be no bias towards the results that you get. Of course, we want your product to do well, but we're not really willing to make up the data for you. So it's just some further advice for consumer studies as well. So sort of like, I guess, FAQs people have asked me before. So I suggest a panel size starting at 100 responses because people sometimes come to me and have no idea what the minimum is. This is kind of very rough guidance. It really depends on the claim and it really depends on the product. The case study that I showed with the hair shine oil, because that was so many different hair types, we had over 300 people on the study. Because obviously if we had 100 people and we tried to break it down like that, there would be such an insignificant amount of data on each hair type to be able to tell if it had passed. So it's kind of a guidance, but again, that may really vary depending on your claims. You need to inform your product liability insurance provider that you're using an external testing house for consumer studies, and you can also let them know that we have full product liability insurance for every company that we operate in as well. The samples must have been safety tested or at least be classified as safe to use as they would be for your consumer, basically. So obviously some products don't need safety testing. They can be released because the ingredients are deemed safe. But obviously this is up to you. You will know what what you need to have in terms of safety testing before you would launch the product on the market. And that's the level of safety testing that we need to test your products. You should make sure that your samples are debranded. This is important for claim substantiation because it removes a bias. This is something that it's quite implicit in a lot of regulations. But if you are with the new cosmetic regulations that are being launched in China, they have said really quite strictly that there should be no brand bias for any evidence for claim substantiation. So if you've got markets in China and any of your evidence so far is based on a branded study, you will need to rerun that study before you can market your product there with those claims. And as we talked about earlier, your questionnaire design should support those claims, and you should seek advice from your professional research agency, hopefully us, if you're ever in doubt. And on that basis, why should you use us? Just to finish off before I go to the question and answer. So we're an award-winning research agency. We've won awards for international business and for family business before. We're obviously fully compliant with the GDPR. We have to be, but we also have an ISO 27001 to make sure that we're audited on this process. And we have our own data protection officer as well, who is on site all the time. We have undesirable event reporting that is I talked about earlier, and that's all made in accordance with the Cosmetic Vigilance Act. So obviously all of our consumers have the right to report their undesirable events, but it's really important for you as well, especially if you're in the EU. Your responsible person will need access to that. As I mentioned earlier, we have full product liability insurance. We have an ISO 9001 for our quality management systems. We're a partner to the Market Research Society. So as I mentioned earlier, they're kind of our experts in questionnaire design, but also in ethical research. So we're fully compliant. You can get regulatory advice at any point for any regulations that I can help with. And if I don't know the answer, I can certainly signpost you to people that I know within the industry that can help. You always get your own designated study manager who will hold your hand step by step through the process, and it will be your main point of contact. So you won't be passed around a team of people. You'll always have one person that you kind of rely on as you go through your study process. So Thomas, if you can summarize the presentation before we go to a question and answer.
Happy to. As we said before, developing is good claims is a joint initiative involving key functions in a company. So think marketing, R&D, legal, sales, really go broad and make sure actually this is performing everywhere. Strong claims are based on insights, deep understanding of your target groups, and this is where the whole thing starts, and this where in a way all your company should be rooted in, being close to your consumers, getting the insights, and only then can you really be successful. There's a strong legal network around claims, and Carys has explained a lot about this. Market research can help you gain a better understanding of your target group and deliver the insights that you need in the end. Develop and identify the most resonant claims, and to validate these claims. And something we have mentioned, we often use the research to validate them, but we not often enough actually use it to understand what are the most resonant claims. And in a way, nobody would stop us or stop you from also asking the question, which of these claims is the one that resonates most with you? To make sure that they're not only validated, but actually that you also, coming back to my point of focus, that you use the ones that are most resonating and not necessarily the ones that get the highest agreement level, because it doesn't really mean in the end they are really important for the consumers. In the end, you need to look at two dimensions, and how far is it substantiated, and how far is this really relevant and interesting for consumers, and how far will it really bring them, entice them to buy your product.
Fantastic. Great. Well, we can open up some questions now. I'm aware that was quite a lot of information. Me and Thomas are very passionate, as you can tell.
Slightly over an hour.
But please do feel free to type any questions you may have, and we'll do our very best to answer them. And as always as well, I will be sending out an email following this up with our contact information. So if you've got any questions that you can't think of right now, but you have any that kind of dawn on you later, please do feel free to email us, and we're always there to help. But I'll give you a couple of minutes just in case there is any burning questions. But I'm pretty sure we've probably exhausted all of your all your questions already. Yeah, I won't hold you all up because like I said, that has been quite a long one. But just to finish off, I just want to put your attention in the direction of the SCS training and events. So if you are interested in doing a diploma in the essentials of cosmetic science, there is a distance learning course from the SDS, and you can enter that anywhere in the world and at any time. It's all done online, and there is a website link there for you if you're interested. There's also going to be the IFSCC Congress in London on the 19th to the 22nd of September, not till 2022, so I really hope that we're able to hold that event at that point, because this year's been a bit of a write-off, as we all know. And you can register your interest there as well, and that website link there. Our next webinar, so we've only got one more scheduled currently, which is for a couple of weeks' time on the 16th of October, and that is the comparison and testing and claims webinar. Oh, I've got a question come in. Oh no, it's just thank you. Thank you. I always want to check in case I've just jumped the gun and someone's answered. Thank you very much. So yes, we've got that coming up in a couple of weeks' time, so please feel free to tune in. I'll be sending out invites to that shortly. And thank you very much. There is our contact information, but as mentioned, it will be sent over. Thank you very much for joining me again, Thomas.
Thank you, Carys, and thank you to all listening.
Thank you to everyone listening, and I'll be following up shortly, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.